G'day guys, my name is CJ. This is the ASUS Zenfone 9 and I've been using this for the last month or so. And for those that like to do things different, this could be the perfect phone for you. Much like how ExpressVPN, the amazing sponsor of this video, could be the perfect solution for your Netflix woes. Being Aussie, I often find that there's a ton of TV shows that I can't watch because I live in the land down under. For example, I've been wanting to get into Adventure Time, but it's not available on Netflix here in Australia, but it is available if I was in Japan. So what do? I turn on ExpressVPN, reroute my internet through their secure servers, and boom, Netflix thinks I'm in Japan and I can watch all of Adventure Time. No sweat. And as a special treat for all you amazing viewers, they're providing 3 months free when you sign up using the link in the description below. I've been using them for ages, even before they sponsored this video, and I love them, and I reckon you will too. So thanks again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. Now let's get started. Now, in a world of 6.5-inch glass and stainless steel behemoths like the iPhone 14 Pro and the Galaxy S23 Ultra, it's always refreshing to see a company buck the trend and do something different. Here we've got ASUS, a Taiwanese company that isn't to, in Apple's old words, think different. We had their weird and innovative Zenphones of old with rotating camera systems, to their gut-busting gaming phones like the ROG phones with RGB lights, fans, and secondary displays. It seems ASUS isn't afraid to keep making you do a double take, and it's easy to see why. Phones nowadays are basically very small iterations of their older models, and any changes really are quite incremental. I mean, the S23 series this year is probably the biggest example of this. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but compare an S22 Ultra with the S23 Ultra, and at first glance, you won't even know they're different phones. But here we've got the ASUS Zenfone 9, and despite the 9 number, it bears no resemblance to the 8 number preceding it, and also the 7 models that came before. And to be honest, that is probably the only common denominator with this line of smartphone, where every model is different to the last, and I think that's what makes it special. The Zenfone 9 has a striking design that breathes a breath of fresh air into the whole cliche of flagship phones nowadays. This isn't a glass sandwich, this isn't a hand-busting phablet, remember that word, that barely fits into one hand, and this isn't even a triple or quadruple camera setup. No, what we've got here is restrained elegance with a bit of personality. For me, I was immediately struck by how compact the phone is. It's a 5.9-inch phone, which compared to the gigantic S23 Ultra I've got here, is absolutely tiny for today's standards. It's not overly thick, it's got slight chamfers to the edges, and it fits really comfortably in the hand. Also, thanks to the lack of double glass and the use of a polymer material on the back, it's also quite light to hold as well. The soft texture on the back makes it feel really nice and really welcoming to hold. I'm not so sure about the text on the rear, but at least it doesn't try to stand out too much, because all you're going to do are look at those huge camera modules. I'm not entirely sure why they're so big, but it makes the phone look like it means business, and we'll get to that soon. Now on the sides you've got soft brushed aluminium which feels really nice. There's also still a headphone jack on the top which is amazing. Turns out we can find enough space to include a headphone jack. And both the volume rocker and power buttons sit on the same side. The fingerprint scanner is also baked into the power button itself, which is great from a design perspective, and it works brilliantly. The only criticism I have though is that the power button sits almost too flush with the frame, and I accidentally pressed this button all the goddamn time. Because there's nothing separating the button from the frame, and because the fingerprint sensor is actually so good, if it's my index finger or thumb, the phone unlocks immediately. Now this can happen when I'm putting the phone back into my pocket, and all of a sudden I've got an unlocked phone in my pocket, thigh or butt dialing people, taking photos and all that, which doesn't help battery life. But look, the fingerprint sensor works really goddamn well. Almost too well. But it does give you a tiny little buzz of the motor when it unlocks, so you at least might be aware of it when it accidentally unlocks itself. But speaking of which, the haptic motors are also kind of lackluster in general. It's definitely not weak per se, but it doesn't feel particularly tight and sophisticated either compared to some of the other flagship phones out there. And that kind of takes away from the whole experience of using the phone. Anyway, small ergonomic quirks aside, it's a super clean design that feels really great in the hand. On the front, you've got a 5.9-inch 120Hz 1080p AMOLED display with a tiny little bit of a chin on the bottom, which isn't as sleek as it probably could be. But it also gets up to about 800 nits or 1100 nits with HDR, which again isn't exactly the best in class, but for general use and for most people, it's fine. It's fine in all situations except for maybe the brightest outdoor days. And whilst it's not the highest resolution phone out there, this smaller footprint means the pixel density is still really top notch at 445 ppi, well over the 300 for Retina displays that we heard all those years ago. I also love how customizable the refresh rate can be. It's not an LTPO display, so it can't automatically ramp up and down depending on what you're looking at, but you can set it to display at full speed at 120Hz, or cycle it down to 90Hz for slightly better battery life but still maintaining a level of fluidity and smoothness, or you could slow it all the way down to 60Hz to maximize battery. But what's the fun in that? At its peak, the display looks great. Everything flows super smooth, details are crisp, color accuracy is pretty good too, and even if it's not quite to your liking out of the box, the great thing about ASUS phones are its customizability, and you can dial in all the settings exactly to your taste, whether it be color temperature or saturation. Combine this with the stereo speakers on the top and bottom, and you've got a phone that more than will meet your everyday casual content consumption needs. And that segues perfectly into the advantage of using this phone. This has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip with 8 gigs of RAM. On top of this, ASUS has one of the most vanilla and customizable skins of Android on the market. Honestly, it's got an OS reminding me of Oxygen OS in OnePlus phones of old, not the newer ones. The granular customization on offer here is awesome. From the icons, fonts, to even the behavior of the launcher itself with customizing how the cards move, it's something that I haven't really thought about since the early days of Android, to be honest. You're going to truly be able to make this phone your own, and plus it's got such a vanilla skin, there's hardly any bloatware to hold it down. And thanks to this OS, in my opinion, the Zenfone 9 is one of the best performing phones even among some of the newer phones rocking the Gen 2 chip. I mean, to be fair though, lag is pretty rare nowadays, even with mid range phones, and there's certainly none of it here. It absolutely flies, and I'm sure performance like this is going to hold up for years. Now, speaking of flying, it's got Wi-Fi 6, which is great, so connectivity is well connected and reliable. The phone has 5G, and it has a physical dual SIM card slot, which is great for those that like to travel a lot. None of this messing about with eSIMs. And all of this performance lasts all day too, and that's thanks to the 4300 mAh battery. It doesn't sound like much in this day and age, but the combination of a smaller 1080p screen means the phone is one of the most efficient iterations of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip. I've been regularly getting 5 to 6 hours of screen on time without even really trying. 5 hours at 120Hz, maybe closer to 6 hours at 90Hz, and probably even longer if you set your screen to 60Hz. But again, what fun is that? Then if it runs out of juice, the phone has a slightly quick charger at 30 watts. It's not blazing fast, but at least charges from 0 to 100 in about 85 minutes, which for 2023 standards isn't blazing quick. Plus, there's no wireless charging either. And that doesn't make a lot of sense because one, it's not the cheapest phone on the market, and two, it's not like the rear is made of metal and unable to do it for physical reasons. It just smacks of cost saving, and for a phone that otherwise looks like one of the most well rounded smartphones, it's kind of disappointing, especially since wired charging isn't that fast either. But what isn't disappointing though were its cameras. Surprisingly, it doesn't seem like much, but we've got a dual camera setup here with a standard wide with a 50 megapixel lens with OIS and a 12 megapixel autofocusing ultra wide that can also double as a macro lens. And on that, something that I absolutely appreciate is that it has macro mode, but not any useless 2 megapixel macro lenses or extra depth lenses to trick you into thinking it's got more focal lengths than it actually does. In any case, the photos made by the phone are actually pretty great. Photos taken with both lenses in daylight are sharp and detailed with really great color accuracy. The main lens can either bin down the 50 megapixels or shoot at full res, and it still shoots pretty quickly with largely no shutter lag. On top of this, the autofocusing performance is really snappy and accurate. In low light, the f1.9 aperture collects a decent amount of light, and whilst there's a little bit of noise in the shadows, it still produces pretty decent shots with some nice natural bokeh as well. And then on top of this, when the light really drops down, as you'd expect, it automatically switches to night mode, and the photos are exactly as you'd expect too. They're bright, sharp, almost artificial at times, but it shoots pretty quickly, and I'd have no qualms relying on this regularly in tricky situations. And this also applies to the ultra-wide lens, which, as I mentioned before, is autofocusing. So we actually get really nice, sharp photos that look great in most lighting situations. Architecture, landscapes, skylines, you name it, it all looks pretty great. Now, in lower light, it does get a bit softer and noisier, but again, when it's combined with night mode, it more than holds its own. Then on the front, you've got a selfie lens that's a 12 megapixel autofocusing camera, meaning it'll take pretty great selfie photos, and it remains just about wide enough for small groups or landscapes. But did I mention it's autofocusing? Can it be that this is slowly becoming the standard? I certainly hope so, and I love that it's here in the Zenfone 9. Now, when it comes to video, it can shoot all the way up to 8K 30 frames per second, which is pretty impressive, but quality is decent. It's definitely best to stick with 4K, where the image quality is best and you've got pretty impressive stabilization too. I mean, it must do, seeing as how it advertises its own gimbal OIS. On the whole, it actually is a pretty reliable shooter, and in a vacuum, it looks pretty great. It's certainly not on the same levels as an iPhone 14 Pro or a Galaxy S23, but you're not going to be disappointed at all. But what is a little disappointing though is just the general durability of the phone. So to start with, the screen, whilst being made from Gorilla Glass Victus, is super scratch prone. Now I've got a screen protector on there now, which does a good job to hide micro scratches, but if you're someone that likes to use your shirt to clean the screen, kind of like that, you'll end up with some scratches. So you're going to want to put a screen protector on straight out of the box, which surprisingly it doesn't come with. Then you've also got the polymer rear. The blue version I've got here, whilst it feels great in the hand, it does seem to pick up the colors of your clothes pretty easily, and if you wear darker jeans, it'll probably rub off here. I've only used it for a few months and the corners are already darkened. It also doesn't seem to clean particularly well either. I've even tried putting a magic eraser on it without much success. So you'll probably want to use a case with it, with which at least it does come with right out of the box, or just choose the black version. But on the whole, the Zenfone 9 is a really great package. It is a true alternative option for lovers of Android that typically don't want to go for players like Samsung or Google, and the Zenfone 9 is one of the fastest and most powerful phones of 2022 and probably 2023 as well, if I'm being honest. Now, over the last few months of use, it doesn't show any sign of age or slowing down, and it's also one of the most ergonomic phones with its small footprint. It starts at 1199 Australian dollars for the 128 gig models, which in flagship terms is not that expensive, all things considered, and when compared to similar price phones like the Pixel 7 Pro or a Galaxy S23, there's not a great deal you're compromising here. For something slightly different and a bit smaller, the Zenfone 9 is a super option even in 2023, where you could realistically find it for even cheaper than retail. Honestly, check it out if you want something different. I think it's a really great choice. Anyway, what do you guys think? Is this something that you'd recommend to your friends and family, or is it even something that you'd be interested in? What other alternate Android phones would you recommend? Be sure to let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed what you saw, give us a like, subscribe for more, and ding the bell icon so you don't miss out. And again, thanks to ExpressVPN for sponsoring the video. As always, stay safe, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.